Tonight on Primetime, Turkey and South Korea have announced a series of agreements spanning nuclear energy, defence and counter-terrorism. The package marks a notable shift in Ankara's search for broader partnerships and raises important questions about Turkey's future. Turkey and South Korea, how far could the partnership go? Good evening. Ankara and Seoul have taken their strategic relationship a step further, with Presidents Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Lee Jae-myung presiding over 6 new cooperation agreements. Well, at the centre is a major move on nuclear energy, setting the tone for wider expansion in defence, technology and security ties. Together, these arrangements carry implications for Turkey's long-term resilience, its access to advanced systems, and its position across the wider region.
New agreements between Turkey and South Korea aim to strengthen bilateral collaboration in trade, technology, the defence industry and investment. The two countries signed 6 agreements covering various fields on Monday after President Recep Tayyip Erdogan hosted South Korean President Lee Jae-myung in Ankara. The signing ceremony took place after the leaders' closed-door talks, during which both sides emphasised their commitment to further developing strategic ties. One of the key documents focuses on nuclear energy. At a joint press conference, Erdogan said negotiations with South Korea on the construction of a nuclear power plant in Turkey are continuing.
I believe that with this visit, we have further strengthened the strong relations between Turkey and South Korea. Discussions are underway between the relevant agencies regarding the construction of a nuclear power plant. In this regard, I consider the Memorandum of Understanding signed between the Korea Electric Power Company and the Turkish Nuclear Energy Corporation an important step.
Regional issues were also on the agenda. President Lee expressing gratitude for Turkey's consistent support for Seoul's policy towards North Korea. He also appreciated Ankara's peace efforts in the Middle East and its work regarding solutions for Syrian refugees.
Okay, to discuss this, let's bring in a security analyst. Dr. Furkan Halyet Yolca is a faculty member at Sakarya University and joins us now. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on Primetime. Give us a sense then, please, of the strategic value that this nuclear deal adds to Turkey's energy security.
Well, Turkey's energy dependence was mostly focusing on the Russian partnership, which was envisioned as a potential threat because it really depended on benevolent Turkey and Russia bilateral affairs. But when you don't have that in the table, that energy dependency and energy security was quite in a jeopardy without Russia. So it's not a new thing, a new development. Turkey has been searching for a nuclear partner for so long now. Only Russia agreed to develop and implement execution-level nuclear support to Turkey, and now we have South Korea as a very dependent provider because, as we can remember, South Korea was also involved in the development and execution of the Çanakkale Bridge and the Asian Tunnel. So these were 2 huge infrastructure projects, and now having the South Korea as a partner in the Sinop nuclear energy plants adds a very important layer that Turkey was missing in terms of energy independence.
And beyond nuclear, of course, there's also this wider defence industry cooperation. How do you expect that to strengthen Turkey's already pretty substantial military capability?
Well, it's really substantial because one of the most important recent military projects was Altay for Turkey. Just a month before, the first batch was delivered to the Turkish army, and we can see that how important and how vital South Korea was for Altay project because of the power unit provision from South Korea. Altay was able to come to life and was able to be delivered to the Turkish inventory. Now, when we think about the power unit issues that the Turkey research and development companies are having because of this, some of the known and official embargoes and unofficial embargoes applied by the European and United States uh, partners, it really becomes important to have South Korea as a provider. Maybe after a level, after some time, South Korea and Turkey will become partners in developing new military projects as well. But for now, South Korea is a very dependable provider for uh, Turkish military research and development and manufacturing projects. Without South Korea has became a partner that doesn't really enforce conditions on sales, exports, because when you import goods from Europe and the United States, they put a very harsh group of conditions on exporting your product and maybe selling to third parties, not maybe states directly, but letting non-state actors use it as well. So South Korea's flexibility on these conditions have made it a very dependable provider, and I think this is going to be very strategic in the next decade as well.
Very dependable, strategic. Also, South Korea is a country famous for consumer technology, advanced engineering. Do you expect some of that high-tech expertise to significantly bolster Turkey's capability?
It's very important to be in the high-tech industries and high-tech manufacturing capabilities as well, because the world is going through a trade war between United States and China, and this puts a very high tension on the chips sector, for example, semiconductors and some high-tech valuable components that are not produced at a global level other than China. So uh, I think Turkey is trying to come in with a plan that's similar to South Korea's, Japan's, and Indonesia's high-tech industry plans. It tries to step by step build up a know-how that's going to be valid and that's going to generate the necessary human power and the artificial intelligence infrastructure that's gonna be feeding the manufacturing sector in Turkey for a long time. I think what we are seeing is very foundational for what's gonna be uh, talked about Turkey's high tech capabilities and high tech manufacturing in the future. So a very vital know-how transfer, a very important fundamental transfer that we are trying to explain to people here. It's not a lot of countries would do that, because then you're creating a competitor to yourself as well, because producing in Turkey is very much cheaper against South Korea. So it's very friendly and it's very collaborative what South Korea is doing in enabling Turkey to become a high-tech provider of the global market.
And you touched on the Sinop nuclear plan already, but how do you expect that in particular to change Turkey's critical infrastructure risk profile?
Well, Turkey initially asked the European Union partners to provide know-how and technology transfer on nuclear energy plants. France declined and it was the most prominent potential partner for Turkey. But then Russia stepped in and took some responsibility to lead the know-how and technology transfer in building the first nuclear energy plant of Turkey. Now we have a game changer in the situation because we are talking about a potential alternative partner to Turkey's nuclear energy plants. Because up until now, Turkey didn't have any option to go to other than Russia in terms of nuclear energy. Having that in the equation changes everything because now you have another dependable provider in terms of nuclear energy provision and know-how transfer that you can alternate your policies and alternate your applications and strategies because you will have someone else to provide your nuclear energy needs in terms of know-how and technology transfer, and you don't have to succumb to Russian demands on other tables because the nuclear energy provision was used as leverage for several times against Turkey. And I think this is going to be very much provide independence in terms of foreign policy as well. So the even a nuclear energy plant alternative source creates a higher level of independence in foreign policy. So it's that connected to each other.
And security, and in particular counterterrorism, is an important consideration in many countries, not including Turkey. How do you expect? There's been a lot of talk about counterterrorism today. How do you expect this partnership to support and change and improve Turkey's capability when it comes to counterterrorism?
Well, when it came to counterterrorism, Turkey and South Korea didn't have much to share, to be honest, because it's a very different geography, and South Korea is not very much involved in the non-state actor conflicts that we have in the region. What I think of is a collaboration in terms of intelligence and information sharing. So I think South Korea agreed upon sharing critical information on critical targets that might be in the hands of the South Korean government. So I think there is going to be an information exchange and provision of information on a consistent basis in terms of fighting terrorism in Turkey. Because now with the terrorless Turkey plan, PKK dissolved itself, and Turkey doesn't have much of a terrorism threat as of today. So I think it's going to be a different level of understanding and different level of information exchange. Maybe South Korea could take some responsibility in rebuilding northern Iraq and northern Syria. That might be a good step for two countries to come in, play together, and build Syria and northern Iraq back together to have their infrastructure and their daily life return back to normal. It might be revolving around the idea of re-infrastructuring Syrian daily life.
And supply chain risk, supply chain security, it's been an increasingly big issue discussed over the last 5-10 years. How does the tech and semiconductor component to this collaboration, how do you think that possibly helps secure, advance Turkey's supply chain stability?
I think it's very vital to be talking about this at the moment because we have a very bifurcated way of trade where either you accept the US dollar as your currency or you don't, and you try to go with local currencies and gold as your international trade currency. That really put a lot of pressure in terms of provision, in terms of providing the technological components that you need from the global market. Because Turkey, as you know, is a country that's been building up its research and development capabilities to the highest in the last decade. And the country as a whole is in need of high-tech components like semiconductors, like chips, like the data links and everything that's most of the time produced outside Turkey because it's cheaper and it's more logistically rational to be produced there. It doesn't mean that Turkey cannot produce them if it wanted to, but it's just cheaper to buy them and continue your research and development because your main point is not producing uh, technological components, but as a product, a technological product that's going to be exported as a good. But as I said in the previous question, Turkey has been trying to become a provider in high-tech industries as well, like a global provider of semiconductors, some types of chips, some types of data links is, I think, in the plans of the Turkey government to be produced in Turkey and sold and exported to the global market. What I think is going to be coming is that some South Korean high-tech industry companies are going to come into to Turkey and invest in Turkey to be producing these semiconductors and to be supporting the supply chain of Europe, to be specific. And then, of course, Turkey will demand some know-how and technology transfers in terms of being able to produce these products by itself and then become a very dependable resource for European supply chain. I think that's the game plan.
Yeah, it's very interesting what you're saying there about the link between South Korea and Europe, the conduit. Turkey, of course, has got a lot of expertise when it comes to playing that role in between different parts of the world. I mean, with that in mind, how do you think all of this might affect now Turkey's regional posture? Will this is this going to be about bringing South Korean expertise not just to Europe, but possibly to the wider region, to the Turkic states, South Caucasus, Central Asia, perhaps?
Well, it's to be honest, Turkey is very careful what it does in the Caucasus and in the Turkic states because it's been a point that's been forcing Turkey to face Russia in terms of expanding its influence and its footprint in the Turkic states. Russia openly and secretly made it very clear that it doesn't want Turkey to be gaining ground on the Turkic states and in the Caucasus because Russia depicts that region as a remnant of the Soviet Republic, and it really has aspirations towards the region in terms of influence and soft power. So I think Turkey's changing posture might be more visible in the Middle East in general. Maybe it's gonna be Turkey is gonna be involving other Asian countries like Indonesia, like Malaysia, in terms of regaining Syrian daily life, and they will be invited to construct the telecommunications, the transportation, the logistical infrastructure of Syria. And Turkey is going to be the arbitrating point and the conductor in terms of this build-up. I think Turkey is seeking alternative friends in Eastern Mediterranean Sea as well. So maybe some South Korean frigates and destroyers will be sent to South uh, Eastern Mediterranean Sea to support Turkish energy-seeking operations. Maybe some of the South Korean companies will join the Turkish companies in searching gas and natural resources in the sea that might protect Turkey in terms of being left alone. The other thing is maybe Turkey will feel more confident against Europe now that it's becoming a transportation point for high-tech industry as well, not just uh, agriculture and cattle. It's the oldest idea that the Turkey was not like a very high-tech country and it was best to use for agricultural products. now that Turkey is trying to change this image in Europe and try to become a high-tech provider in terms of European buyers. And the recent acquisition of one of the biggest unmanned aerial vehicle providers in Italy by Baykar was a big sign of that.
Yeah, very interesting indeed. Dr. Furkan Halit Yolca, we thank you very much indeed for your analysis. Thank you. Well, after the break, we will look at the Pope's upcoming visit to Turkey and Lebanon and what this tour is expected to signal. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. Now, Pope Leo XIV is set for his first major overseas tour as leader of the Catholic Church, with planned stops in Turkey and Lebanon. Now, the visit will include key commemorations, high-level talks, and a series of interfaith engagements across both countries. Here's what we know so far.
Pope Leo XIV is set to make his first international journey since his election, visiting Turkey and Lebanon from November 27th to December 2nd to promote peace and interfaith dialogue. In Turkey, the Pope will mark the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea in Iznik, where the Christian creed was first formulated. He is scheduled to meet President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara, address Turkish authorities and engage with civil society and diplomats. He will also visit Istanbul, including the Blue Mosque and the Cathedral of the Holy Spirit, taking part in ecumenical prayers and meetings with Orthodox leaders. These visits highlight interfaith dialogue and Turkey's role as a strategic crossroad between East and West. The Pope will then travel to Lebanon, meeting top political leaders and religious authorities. Key events include visits to the monastery of St. Maroon, the shrine of Our Lady of Lebanon, interreligious gatherings in Martyrs Square, and a prayer at the site of the 2020 Beirut port explosion, which claimed over 220 lives. His visit aims to promote peace, unity, and interfaith understanding.
The Georgian Prime Minister has asked Pope Leo XIV to consider a visit to Georgia ahead of next year's major regional Christian anniversary. A-News's Nini Nikolashvili has more from Tbilisi.
The Georgian Prime Minister's audience with Pope Leo XIV at the Vatican marked one of the most symbolic foreign visits of Irakli Kobakhidze's term so far. During the meeting, the Prime Minister extended formal invitation for the Pope to visit Georgia, an offer that, if accepted, would carry significant historical resonance. Kobakhidze highlighted that next year Georgia will celebrate 17 centuries since the nation's conversion to Christianity, a milestone that, he said, makes a potential papal visit especially meaningful. He emphasized that such a visit would not only honor the country's Christian heritage, but also strengthen relations between Georgia and the Holy See. According to the Prime Minister, the discussion with Pope Leo XIV was very interesting, touching on both spiritual and political themes. Kobakhidze thanked the Vatican for its long-standing support for Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity since the country restored independence more than 3 decades ago. He underlined that this support remains crucial at a time when Georgia faces continued regional challenges. The meeting also focused on issues the Georgian government has increasingly emphasized in recent years: the protection of Christian and traditional values. Kobakhidze said the conversation included what he described as the global struggle to preserve these values, highlighting the Georgian government's position that cultural and spiritual identity must be defended amid international pressures. Tbilisi's outreach to the Vatican also carries diplomatic weight. For the Georgian government, strengthening ties with the Catholic world's highest authority is part of a broader effort to diversify international partnerships while reinforcing the image of Georgia as a nation deeply rooted in its Christian identity. Whether Pope Leo XIV will accept the invitation remains unknown, but officials in Tbilisi say that they are hopeful. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss this is A News's Nigar Shirinova. Nigar, good to see you back in the studio with us.
Hello, thank you for having me again.
This visit, there's always a strategy, isn't there, behind these things? Pope Leo's upcoming trip to Turkey. Why has he chosen this as his first major journey abroad?
Okay, so Pope's first international visit is now to Turkey. And that's very interesting, but I think that it's also historic and some kind of symbolic moment because of like Turkey specifically. It's his first visit overseas, and he chooses for this Turkey. There are some reasons. For example, here I can say that Turkey is very important because of the history. It's the early homeland of the Christianity, we can say. So the cities in the Turkey, the country itself is very having a historic roots from the Christianity, and he's also planning to visit Ankara and Istanbul, and also there is an important moment. There is also 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. So he would, the Pope will visit this event anniversary. So this is a very historic moment for Turkey hosting this.
And Nigar, just tell us a bit more about that, because as you say, it's the commemoration of the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. Within the wider context of the Catholic Orthodox dialogue, tell us about the significance of that.
So it defines very important core beliefs for both Catholics and Orthodox. So the Pope's visit to, specifically it's in the Iznik city of Turkey, by the way. So Pope's visit there, and also he will, if I'm not mistaken, he will meet with the Orthodox church leaders. So this is very important moment in the interfaith dialogue. Also, the visit to Turkey, it's showing the dialogue between Catholic Muslim country, Muslim majority country, and also Catholic Orthodox. So it's a really historic moment. It's a big symbolic and also historically important for the Turkey. And as a key regional actor, the country, Turkey, is hosting this, and it's very important for Turkey, I believe.
And we're constantly told, aren't we, that, or constantly reminded that we're now living in a multipolar world. I suppose that increases the need for interfaith dialogue, and that's also going to be a big component, isn't it, of this tour?
Yeah, this is like very important because the Turkey is actually a constitutionally secular country, but we can say that the majority of the people living in Turkey, they are mostly Muslims, and also the interest of West and Catholics too in Turkey, it is huge actually. It was huge, and it is huge because of the historically coming especially the city Istanbul. And if I'm not mistaken, I know that Pope will visit also the Blue Mosque and some other places. He will meet with the President Erdogan. He will meet with some other political leaders in Turkey. So it shows the importance of the country, Turkey, as a regional key player. And also I would say that for Turkey, it shows that Turkey is hosting this kind of big symbolic event. It's also showing the connection and also respect to the religion, peace, and also it's very important for Turkey.
Yeah, very much so. It's presenting an outward-looking nation, isn't it? Capable of holding those sort of dialogues.
Cooperation.
Let's just turn to Georgia, if we may. How does the Georgian invitation fit into the broader engagement with the Caucasus, especially ahead of the country's anniversary of Christianization?
2026.
Yes.
So, as I know, last time when President Kavalyashvili visited the Vatican, he invited the Pope to come to the anniversary, 1700th anniversary of the Christianization, which will be next year actually in 2026. So this is also a very big event for the Christian community in Georgia, because Georgia is also actually historically very important for the Christian world. So for them, hosting Pope, having this event is having a big meaning. So they would like to have Pope next year, but whether he will come or not, there are no news about this. So we will see, but it's for Georgia, it's very important actually, and especially after Turkey having Pope's visit here, it's very important.
And Nigar, do we know yet the extent to which this has been welcomed across the region, the regional reaction to this visit? Because I suppose this could indicate, couldn't it, how subsequent visits, might go, assuming this goes well.
Yeah, actually this visit is not only, we can say that religious, but also it's diplomatic. So there is a religious diplomacy going on in the region. And especially in this region, it's, I believe that everything is now positively going, because there is no big political change or influence. It's just a good interface dialogue between religions and its branches, so it's welcomed actually in the region. So the Turkey is also neutrally looking at this situation. It hosts this kind of big religious event, and it's also like not only in this region. Turkey is very important. It's in the crossroads. It's bridging the Middle East, Europe, and Caucasus. So it's very important event in very important region, and it's mostly welcomed. Yeah.
Very important event in a very important region. Nigar, it's a very interesting story, and we thank you very much for covering it so
thank you so much.
Thoroughly. Thank you. Okay, after the break, we'll be looking at the latest changes to the Ukraine peace plan and what they reveal about the negotiations now underway. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Primetime. Ukraine and the United States have now produced a revised 19-point framework, a significant reworking of the earlier 28-point proposal. The updated draft removes some of the most contentious elements, including a blanket bar on NATO membership and demands for immediate territorial concessions. But despite that progress, negotiations are still underway, with major questions on territory and enforceable security guarantees unresolved. All of this, of course, is playing out against continuing violence, with fresh missile and drone strikes hitting Kyiv's energy sector. And while the diplomatic track moves forward, the Kremlin has yet to formally engage with the new draft, dismissing a separate European counter-proposal as unworkable.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says negotiations in Geneva have produced a more workable version of the US peace framework aimed at ending the war with Russia.
As of now, after Geneva, there are fewer points, no longer 28, and many proper elements have been incorporated into this framework. It's very difficult to finalize the document, and we must do everything properly.
Zelensky says the new draft includes correct elements, but the most sensitive points will be discussed directly with US President Donald Trump.
Our team has already reported on the new draft of steps. The sensitive issues, the most delicate points, I will discuss with President Trump. Ukraine will never be an obstacle to peace.
While Kyiv says progress has been made, the White House insists that no Trump-Zelensky meeting is scheduled yet.
There's no meeting scheduled right now. As for where we are, I spoke with Secretary Rubio at length. I spoke with the president as well. Everybody inside feels optimistic about what happened and transpired yesterday in Geneva. The vast majority of these points have been agreed upon. The Ukrainians have worked on language with us together.
Washington says the revised framework now has broad alignment between US and Ukrainian negotiators, but the final version will still need approval from both Trump and Zelensky, and ultimately agreement from Russia.
Joining me now to discuss this further is Diogo Castro Silva, a geopolitical analyst in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Diogo, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show. Before we get to the Ukrainian amendments, I'd just like to get your view, your evaluation, please, on the original US draft. How does that version, with its territorial concessions and security limits, alter the strategic landscape for both Ukraine and Russia?
So the initial draft, I think, shows a couple of things. One is that the national security process of the US government, I would say the state capacity of the US government is good. So what you have is a kind of court where courts put themselves in freelancing, in a way very similar to Putin's arrangement, where you have Dmitriev that is doing parallel diplomacy despite Lavrov, and in the US you have Witkoff and everything, bypasses totally the normal national security process of the US. So that's the first aspect. The second is that it seems today pretty clear that what you had initially was a kind of a little bit mitigated Kremlin wish list that goes back to the points of Istanbul in 2022, and it was very similar in nature. Some analysts even say it was a poor translation from Russia because there were some idiomatic expressions that in English are a little bit awkward. And so what you had was basically a Kremlin's position that goes back a long way, with certain adjustments, the size of Ukraine forces and so forth, but in a way very similar in nature. So that document would almost be like surrender, suicide note for Ukraine, which is where we are now, and that is why the document never went forward. Just the last aspect is that there are credible people like Chris Grozev that have seen that document in a slightly different form 6 months ago, which means it was not worked by the US, and which means that it was basically portraying Kremlin's positions.
And presumably, the assumption, I think, has always been that any Ukrainian amended version would shift the balance back towards more Ukrainian sovereignty. What are the most significant changes that you've noticed in this Ukrainian amended version?
Well, you have to see the initial document and this one in these two perspectives. If you believe Russia has limited war aid, then even the first would be more acceptable. But if you believe that Russia, what it wants in the end is a kind of satrapy in Ukraine like it did with Belarus, even if it does it in phases, then the question of surrendering fortified lines, limitations to defense policy are really unacceptable to Ukraine, because in fact what Russia and what Ukrainians believe, and many Europeans believe, and few Americans in the White House believe, is that the ultimate aim of Russia is to destroy Russia as a sovereign entity. So this whatever agreement is a step. That does not mean that Russia has curtailed its ambitions. So that's what Ukraine has adjusted, are those elements that make it more vulnerable to a third attack, because we are in the second war and now a third one. So these adjustments were not ceding territory that has not been occupied, revising the limitations on the size of the armed forces, the question of NATO, which Ukraine, even if it's not on the door to enter, precluding Ukraine from having that intention is an infringement on its sovereignty. The question of not having foreign troops on its soil, because that contradicts the coalition of the willing. So these are the elements that Ukraine is revising.
And the NATO element, sorry to interrupt, Diego. Sorry about it, but the NATO, the question of NATO, I think is particularly interesting. These restrictions on NATO membership, or even military size, military scale, how is that going to, I mean, is that going to be a red line? And if not, how is that going to affect Ukraine's long-term security posture?
Well, there is a lot of people in the West have the wrong notion that this war was started because of expansion. That is used by Putin as a convenient argument, because you had the invitation back in 2005, I believe, to Ukraine, but was never, or 2008, but was never on the verge of materialize, because there is no consensus in NATO for Ukraine to join. The question is, one thing is for NATO having the consensus for Ukraine to join. The other thing is for Ukraine not being able to want. That's a different thing. Secondly, Putin is using, with the complicity of the US, because in the original draft there is a strange that says the US will mediate between NATO and Russia. Well, the US is the founding member of NATO. NATO won't exist without the US. So it's a little bit awkward for that. But nevertheless, our limitations even on NATO posture that talk about fighters in Poland, what about the Baltics? So the aim of is, again, erase sovereignty of Ukraine and really put a way to terminate NATO viable entity. And that was the two goals of the document, which now, I mean, the Europeans have their views, and everybody now is on the document and changing it. So those parts are also being changed, because it is really, those are the Kremlin aims.
And finally, Diego, I just want to ask you, how do you expect Moscow to respond to this amended version by Ukraine? What is the strategy here? Is it to completely refute any amendments, because they've said all along that whatever amendments are made must still be in the spirit of the original agreement they had with Washington? Is it to tactically cherry pick some of those amendments that actually are inconsequential, but it looks like they're kind of being conciliatory in some way? What's the thinking in Moscow about how now to react?
I have the opinion that you have two views, let's put it this way. One is that this was a serious thing on behalf of the Russians. And then I do believe you still have some room to go, although I don't think Russia is there to make the compromises needed to do the peace. I think the regime is too invested in the war, even with very little results to show after 3 years of gruesome war, to climb down. I don't think we are there yet. The other more subtle view is this was all a kabuki, because what they wanted to derail through this theater that we return every month is to derail legislation that was on the verge of being approved in Congress of the US regarding sanctions on Russian, on further sanctions, I would say. And secondly, the December European summit, which is advancing towards using the Russian frozen that are sitting in Europe and passing to Ukraine in some shape or form. So the cynical view would argue that Russia wants to derail these two things, and this is all the kabuki. So, well, we throw an agreement that Ukraine now feels obliged to refuse. If it accepts, great, we'll open the chain, or otherwise have derailed the two pieces of, or these political initiatives that are contrary to our interests. On this second part, let's see what happens in Congress and what will happen in the December EU heads of state meeting that will occur, and what will they decide regarding the Russian frozen funds.
Mr. Diego Castro Silva, we thank you very much for your analysis and for joining us from Sao Paulo in Brazil. Thank you. We'll take a short break now. When we return, Andy Mioch will be here breaking down the very latest business news stories of the day. Do stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching Prime Time. Now, Andy Mioch is with us with the very latest business news stories of the day. Andy, what have you got for us?
Well, Guy, tonight we'll be covering some potentially historic results for tech companies, the U.S. sanctions on Russian oil biting in the Western Balkans, some consumer reports, and there's also some news in the wearable tech sector. So let's begin. First up, Alphabet is on track for a historic $4 trillion market valuation, driven by a sharp focus on artificial intelligence tools and impressive earnings from its Google division.
Alphabet was on track to hit a historic $4 trillion market valuation on Tuesday, powered by an impressive year-long rally fueled by the Google parent's sharpened focus on artificial intelligence tools. Shares of the company were up 4.1% at $331.7 in pre-market trading, putting the company on course to breach the key milestone at the open. The surge reflects a striking reversal in sentiment toward Alphabet after some investors feared the company had lost its AI edge to OpenAI after the 2022 launch of ChatGPT, even though it invented much of the underlying technology behind generative AI. Alphabet has regained momentum this year by turning its cloud business, once an also-ran, into a key growth driver, drawing in Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway as an investor, and winning strong early reviews for its new Gemini 3 model. The search and ad tech giant joins an elite club of big tech companies racing to dominate the booming technology as AI continues to captivate Wall Street this year. Analysts said Google is well positioned in the AI race thanks to its strong cash flow, in-house chips that serve as an alternative to NVIDIA's pricey processors, and a sprawling internet search business that is already benefiting from AI integration.
Normally, you'd have to spend
Across the globe, Chinese giant Alibaba exceeded quarterly revenue expectations, powered by its investments in one-hour delivery services and strong cloud growth.
Chinese e-commerce giant Alibaba beat analysts' estimates for quarterly revenue on Tuesday as investments in one-hour delivery helped drive more users to its shopping apps, while its cloud division reported strong growth. US-listed shares of the company rose 4% in pre-market trading. The company reported revenue of 247.8 billion yuan in the second quarter, compared with estimates of 242.6 billion yuan. Alibaba's results come against the backdrop of a costly battle in China's instant retail sector, where major players are pouring billions into one-hour delivery services to capture market share. At the same time, Alibaba has been investing heavily in artificial intelligence, emerging as one of China's leaders in the field. Recently, it launched a free app built on the latest version of its Qwen large language model, which surpassed 10 million downloads within its first week. It still has a long way to go to catch market leader ByteDance's Dubao, which has 150 million users. Alibaba's consumer-facing shift comes amid an intensifying price war in China's domestic AI market, sparked by DeepSeek's focus on low-cost computing and app development, a strategy that has forced rivals to slash prices and follow suit.
On to the next piece of news. U.S. sanctions on Russian oil giants are being felt in the Western Balkans. The Niš oil refinery in Serbia has, according to local media, halted operations due to a lack of crude oil supplies amid the sanctions. The country is scrambling to secure alternative fuel supplies for the winter.
Operations at Serbia's Russian-owned Niš oil refinery have halted due to a lack of crude oil supplies, Belgrade-based Nova.rs TV reported on Tuesday, in the latest sign that US sanctions on the project could threaten fuel supplies across the Balkan country. Officials at Niš and in the Serbian government declined to comment. The US Treasury Department's Office of Foreign Assets Control placed sanctions on Russia's oil sector in January, including Niš, which is majority owned by Russia's Gazprom Neft and Gazprom. The US granted Niš repeated waivers before the sanctions finally came into effect in October. Banks then stopped processing Niš payments, and Croatia's Janaf pipeline halted crude deliveries to the refinery. Since then, Serbia has been scrambling to secure alternative fuel supplies for winter. Serbia's government on Monday said it has sufficient fuel reserves to supply the domestic market. But on Tuesday, a lack of crude meant that the refinery had stopped operating, Nova reported, meaning it will not be able to produce more products like gasoline, diesel and jet fuel. A refinery source confirmed the news. The refinery does have fuels in storage, Nova and the source said.
Still in Europe, new car sales across the continent rose 4.9% in October as electric vehicle registrations outpaced petrol and diesel, despite this year's challenges for the auto industry.
New car sales in Europe rose 4.9% in October as electric cars outpaced petrol and diesel registrations. Data from the European Automobile Manufacturers Association showed on Tuesday that sales in the EU, Britain and the European Free Trade Association rose to over 1 million cars. Its largest markets, including Germany and Britain, added more new cars than last year. The European car industry has taken a series of hits this year. They include US President Donald Trump's trade tariffs, a slowdown in the Chinese market, and a slower than expected transition to electric vehicles. There have also been recent worries about a potential chip supply chain crisis surrounding Dutch chipmaker Nexperia. Registrations at Volkswagen, Stellantis, rose year-on-year by 6.5% and 4.6% respectively, while Renault went up more than a tenth. Tesla's sales, meanwhile, dropped almost by half from a year ago, while BYD's sales jumped a near 207%. And while electrics and hybrids saw a boost, all major markets saw drops in their petrol and diesel registrations.
In aviation earnings news, EasyJet reported better than expected full-year operating profits, prompting an upgrade of its medium-term targets for its holidays business.
British carrier EasyJet reported better than expected full-year operating profit on Tuesday and upgraded its medium-term target for its holidays business after meeting the target early. European airlines have reported mixed results in the final quarters of the year as the struggle to mitigate spiraling costs and negative repercussions from air traffic control strikes continues to weigh on their balance sheets despite strong demand. Low-cost carrier EasyJet's headline operating profit for the financial year ended September grew to £703 million, above the £669.3 million projected by analysts. EasyJet Holidays, the company's high-margin package holiday arm, is now expected to log £450 million in pre-tax profit by 2030.
And finally, in tech wearables, Meta's latest smart glasses developed with EssilorLuxottica have generated buzz in the tech world with features that capture and display images and connect to AI.
Meta and EssilorLuxottica's stable of smart Ray-Bans and Oakleys, which first launched in 2023, have captured the tech world's attention by answering calls, taking pictures, and playing music. The latest model, the Meta Ray-Ban display, includes a visual display in the right lens and connects users to AI. US smart glasses sales tripled year over year in 2025, according to market research firm Circana. Great news for a type of gadget that crashed and burned after Google's ill-fated glass experiment in 2013, and which has been trying to regain respect ever since. Holiday sales this season will likely dwarf the $52.6 million shoppers spent on smart glasses in the final quarter of 2024, according to Circana. Analysts expect tech companies like Apple and Samsung to release their own smart glass products soon. About 25% of respondents surveyed by Civic Science, a consumer research firm, recently said they are interested in trying smart glasses, up from 20% early this year. Smart glasses ownership now is about where smartwatches were in 2017, and interest is rising, surveys show. A spokeswoman for Meta declined to comment on how many displays have been sold or how many will be produced for the holidays. The displays, which sell for $799 before adding prescription lenses, will not be discounted for Black Friday or Cyber Monday, the spokeswoman added. Simpler and more widely available Ray-Ban Meta models, which lack a visual display, sell for $300 to $400. EssilorLuxottica said in February it had sold more than 2 million pairs of Ray-Ban Meta smart glasses since launching them in September 2023, and now says it's on track to raise production capacity to 10 million units a year by the end of 2026.
And that is a wrap on today's business brief. On that note, back to you, Guy.
Andy, are we going to be wearing these glasses, you think, or is this going to be a fad that just fades away?
I don't know, there's been those experiences with those Google glasses that failed, but these ones look like they might even come into fashion.
Yeah. I like the idea. Anyway, very interesting indeed. Thank you very much. Okay, after the break, we take a closer look at Armenia's decision to halt talks on the Tejas jet and what it means for India's export ambitions. Do stay with us. You're back with Prime Time. Now, Armenia has paused its negotiations to purchase Indian fighter jets following the fatal crash at the Dubai Air Show, a decision that now casts fresh uncertainty over the aircraft's future and its prospects on the export market.
Armenia has suspended talks to buy 12 Indian-made Tejas fighter jets after one of the aircraft crashed during an air display at the Dubai Air Show. The crash killed its pilot, Wing Commander Namanch Sial. The Jerusalem Post reports that Yerevan had been in advanced discussions with the Indian government and manufacturer HAL on a $1.2 billion agreement. The deal would have marked the Tejas jet's first major export sale. The Tejas was designed to replace India's aging MiG-21 fleet, and only 40 units have been delivered so far. Investigators are still examining what caused the Dubai crash, but the incident has already raised concerns about the program's safety record. If Armenia withdraws completely, key suppliers involved in the jet's development could face substantial financial losses at a time when India is trying to secure new buyers.
Well, joining me now in the studio to discuss this in detail is Inside Politics host and frontline journalist Anastasia Lavrina. Anastasia, great to see you as
Thank
always.
you for having me.
To begin with then, what exactly prompted Armenia to press pause on these negotiations over the deal?
Well, Guy, thank you so much for having me today here. And let me start pointing out that India has emerged as one of the main arms suppliers for Armenia. There were long-term negotiations between two countries. And taking into account that Armenia still have Soviet weapons, especially when we are talking about the still operating legacy Soviet era MiG-29s or Su-25, so India was as the country which could really help to modernize military equipment in Armenia. In comparison with the other countries, India was offering quite a good proposal to Armenia. That's why it was cheap, it was somehow operational, and Armenia was supposed to be the main let's say, consumer of these products from India. But the situation, what's happened in Dubai during that show, I would say a very important event where the countries can demonstrate their capacities and capabilities in the military industry, changed the minds of many people in Armenia, especially because the defense minister himself was participating at that show in Dubai. Armenia does not have too much money to spend it for nothing. Therefore, taking into account the credibility, the inability of India to pursue as a global community in the efficiency of these new fighter jets really affected the decision which was taken in Armenia to stop this procedure. We haven't received any official notifications about how it will be proceeded in the future. Probably there will be some type of cooperation between the two countries. But as for now, I would say the Dubai Air Show crash destroys the narrative of Tejas fighter jets as a reliable, export-ready platform, and immediately forced Yerevan to reassess risks.
I mean, obviously, a crash like that, you know, a tragic that a person lost their life, a very difficult situation, obviously is going to impact on negotiations. But is there more to this than just the crash? Were there other points that were being discussed, debated, leading up to the Dubai Air Show?
As I already mentioned, the Dubai Air Show 2025 was one of the world's most prestigious airspace exhibitions. And they were not only the delegations from Armenia, but delegations from all around the world who had a chance not only to demonstrate their own innovations in the defense sphere, but also to sign new contracts, agreements, and etc. And India, which is continuing this program for quite a lot of time, was really about to sign new contracts and deals during that meetings. Especially because such a huge expectations was coming from the agreement to be signed and released with Armenia. So what happened there, the crash during the safety demonstration reinforced doubts about the aircraft stability and overall maturity. And I would also add that this is not the first time when it happens. The first loss, the second loss in 2 years actually, is the first time it happened, if I'm not mistaken, in March 2024 in one of the states in India. And it's already at that time affected the reputation of these fighter jets. And this is it was luckily that during the first crash there was no any losses, no any let's say lives was lost during the first time, but this time it was demonstrated officially, and how it's happened immediately within the next couple of hours. The video was available in all media platforms all around the globe. That's why now the countries are reconsidering. India has a, let's say, huge competition with the countries like China, Pakistan, for example, and taking into account the, let's say, conflict situation in between of India and Pakistan, India is willing to have its own fighter jets in the countries like Armenia, for example, which had a big concern in Azerbaijan before previously. So now the countries are coming to the conclusion that the fighter jets produced by Israel, by Turkey, by let's say by China or Pakistan, they are more safe, they are more reliable, and those countries already have a good types of cooperation with the countries across the world. So for India, the Asia and the South Caucasus, when it comes to Armenia, were considered as the main markets for the near future, which will definitely positively affect the economic development of India. But after this situation, after this accident, the situation completely changed, and India has to do its best to pursue the international community that it still can be considered as a reliable partner in the defense sphere.
Yeah, it comes at an interesting time, as you say, because India very clearly has these broad ambitions to expand its defense footprint. To what extent now is that tarnished? To what extent does a country like India perhaps need to rethink how it positions itself in the world?
Well, there's much work to be done. Even if we come back to Armenia, Armenia was reportedly considering up to 20 fighters, valued at around $1.2 billion. So it's a huge amount of money, especially for Indian economy, and now there is nothing. Again, we are talking as it's now because there was no any official statements done by the Armenian side whether they are willing to continue. And this program itself takes a lot of time, and that's why the countries are quite skeptical about the reliability of these fighter jets. And all the parts of these fighters are not being produced by India only. There are some parts being imported from the United States, and if there are some delays, it also affects the program itself. And we cannot ignore the fact that other countries, as I already mentioned, like Turkey, Israel, or China, or Pakistan, are also moving forward, modernizing its defense sphere and the products which they're offering to the global market, to the global world. Therefore, India now has to work on its own program to achieve the desired results, to come back to this level which was announced before the show in Dubai. And secondly, it has to consider what exactly has to be done in order to modernize and make these fighter jets quite secure and operational in near future. Otherwise, India will lose its position for quite a lot of time.
If this deal, Anastasia, does manage to become unpaused, get resurrected, what will be the reaction, do you think, here in Baku? Has there been concern about this deal and how it might impact regional security?
Well, Baku had a lot of concern about the military cooperation between India and Armenia, especially since the end of the 44 Days Patriotic War in November 2020, because when Azerbaijan was willing to see the peaceful development of the negotiation process to achieve the desired results, it happened before, let's say, I am talking about the time before, prior to the August 8th, what we observed in Washington at trilateral meeting. So Azerbaijan invested a lot in the peaceful development. At the same time, India was willing to come to the region, especially from the military side, and the only country that was willing to deepen the defense cooperation, that was Armenia. And there were a lot of, let's say, predictions made by the experts. If India exports so much military equipment to Armenia, it will definitely affect the peaceful negotiation between the two countries. It's quite obvious that Armenia is willing to modernize its defense sphere, its army, again, to stop referring only to the weapons which is being imported from Russia, especially those military equipment which is available in Armenia since the Soviet time. And in order to modernize its own military sphere, Armenia is looking for reliable but at the same time not very expensive products, and India was a country that was offering that. So here in Baku there was a lot of concern, how will it affect the negotiation process in between. You yourself can understand that what we see now, the peaceful process between two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, it became possible only when two sides were agreed to sit together and negotiate the future of the people, the future of the country, the future of the region. And when we observe the intervention from outside, especially from the countries who are willing to promote its own interests, it's not a secret that India is willing to reinforce its cooperation with Armenia, not only because of the commercial sides, not only because they are willing to sell their weapons to any countries, but also because it wants to increase its presence to, let's say, somehow to manage the relations which we have, quite a good and stable relations between Azerbaijan and Pakistan. Again, taken into account quite difficult situation between India and Pakistan, India is willing to have its own military presence in the region of the South Caucasus. So, and it will definitely affect the peace process negotiation between Yerevan and Baku. So now, I wouldn't say that we are so much happy, because it's not me who is deciding whether it's affect positively or negatively. But I guess for Armenia now, it's more important to think about the peaceful coexistence with its neighbors. It of course will try to modernize its defense sphere, but for Armenia, it's better to find a reliable, stable, and a partner who is willing to see the peaceful cooperation between Azerbaijan and Armenia in the region, rather than to promote its own double standards.
It's interesting what this crash, this tragic crash, has done, though, isn't it? Because of course it has affected this deal. What it's also done, though, is it's shined the light of media attention on this relationship now, which really perhaps may not have been Yerevan's intention originally.
Yeah, absolutely. I have watched many videos available in the social media, but with all consequences, what we observed, what we saw in Dubai, again, the number one concern is how it will affect the India's defense industry. That's the first issue. The second, of course, how it will affect the partnering country for India, whether it's willing to be in a part of Asian defense market, or is willing to expand its presence in other regions. In other regions, it's not about Europe or United States, it's more about the South Caucasus. And so how it will affect the future relations with Armenia, whether Armenia will try to find new partners. Coming back to a couple of years before, remember there was some much concern even in the bordering countries here in Turkey and Georgia, whether it will destabilize the situation in the South Caucasus. So apart from India and Russia, probably Armenia may willing to have more deep defense partnership with the United States probably, but there are also some standards which Armenia has to, let's say, fix in order to have a stable relations and in order to import some kind of military equipment. So with the availability, with the price, with a political environment around the bilateral relations, India was number one country to work with Armenia, main arms suppliers as I already mentioned. But as for now, let's see how the situation will be changed within the next maybe months once India is stabilized the crisis it has inside.
Indeed, very complex, very interesting story. Anastasia, always great to see you. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, after the break, we'll assess Kabul's allegations over the latest cross-border strikes and what they mean for an already tense relationship with Pakistan. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Prime Time. 10 people, including women and children, have been killed and several others injured in what Afghan authorities say were Pakistani airstrikes across 3 provinces. Kabul has condemned the incident as a violation of its territory. A News' correspondent Tamim Bahis has the latest now from the capital.
Afghan officials say Pakistani aircrafts have bombed Khost, Paktika and Kunar provinces in eastern Afghanistan. One strike hit just after midnight in Khost's Gurbaz district, destroying the home of a local resident. According to the Afghan spokesperson Zabiullah Mujahid, the attacks have caused over a dozen of casualties, including children and women. The Afghan authorities condemned the incident as an unjustifiable attack on civilians, insisting the area had no militant presence. Pakistan, meanwhile, has not issued any confirmation or denial of the strikes. The report comes at a tense moment for Islamabad. A day earlier, 3 suicide bombers targeted a Frontier Corps installation in Peshawar, putting security forces across the country on high alert. The strikes comes as regional countries say they are ready to mediate as relations between Afghanistan and Pakistan continue to deteriorate. Turkey is expected to send a high-level delegation to Islamabad this week to discuss the situation and explore ways to ease tensions. Iran, meanwhile, has announced plans to host a regional meeting next month, bringing together all of Afghanistan's neighbors, including Russia and China, to examine the growing instability and search for a diplomatic path forward. Both Ankara and Tehran say their aim is to prevent the crisis from escalating further. But with communication between Islamabad and Kabul strained, it remains unclear whether regional mediation will gain traction. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Well, tonight we're going to look at both sides of this story. First, I'll be joined by a political analyst from Pakistan, followed by a regional analyst covering the Afghanistan angle. Allow me to introduce now my first guest, Mr. Javed Rana, who is in Islamabad for us. Javed, very good to see you, as always. The Taliban then claim that it's Pakistani forces who were behind this strike in Khost. How is Islamabad responding, evaluating that situation?
Well, I think the military spokesman has denied that Pakistan was involved in any drone attacks inside Afghanistan's territory. But I can't say they haven't done it, because previously in similar situation, when there was attack in Kabul, and Pakistan at that particular point of time had neither denied nor accepted the responsibility. Now I think this is a kind of situation where it is hard to expect that someone else can do these attacks. But again, there is no hard evidence to suggest that the Pakistan has done it. The Afghan government might have it, and if they have it, they must make it public. But I think the reason, possibly, if Pakistan is involved, then the reason they are denying it may be because of the fact that perhaps there are casualties, civilian casualties, and if there are civilian casualties as the Afghan government is claiming, then certainly it is a tragic, and that means that there is no appetite for any airstrikes against kind of friend against brotherly country in Afghanistan. But at the same time, there is also a lot of frustration in Pakistan, more particularly within the Pakistan military, because there has been surge in terrorist attacks, and Pakistan's intelligence uh, agencies have been claiming that they have the evidence that the most of the terrorist attacks which have been happening, that is from across the border. They are being planned there, and they, in one way or the other, Afghan government is involved because Afghan government is providing shelter to Pakistan TTP, which is a terrorist organization, which most of these its members are Pakistani, and the government in Kabul, they are refusing to either expel them or take any action. So Pakistan is interpreting it that Afghan government is in one way or the other is in league with these terrorist attacks.
And Javed, where are we going now? You know, we had the October clashes. We've just had this recent incident. What is your analysis of the trajectory of these tensions? Are things getting worse, about to get worse, or do you see it differently?
Well, I think it is not that easy for the Pakistan to go for a full-scale war against Afghanistan. The reason being is that the Afghans are partially part of Pakistan society. They're part of the social fabric. On the both sides of the divide, they're the same ethnic group, they're the same religious group, and then both countries have been interdependent onto each other. But I think in case of Pakistan, there is a strong frustration, and they want to do something. Now the apprehensions are that the Pakistan could possibly can go for a regime change operation. Pakistan being a bigger military power, they can militarily destroy the military infrastructure of Afghan government. But at the same time, Afghan government has also expertise in the suicide attacks. So I think that they have also the ability to cause chaos in Pakistan and sustain unrest in Pakistan. So therefore, I think if there is a regime change operation, if that has been planned in Islamabad, and if it has a backing of the Americans, then I think maybe if not sooner, maybe in the longer run, Pakistan can go for it. And in Islamabad, there is also a lot of resentment that the Afghan government is closing up with India, which is an arch rival of Pakistan, a country which has been playing havoc with the Afghan Taliban when they were insurgents and they were supporting the Ashraf Ghani government, while the Taliban, they then had taken shelter inside Pakistan. So therefore, I think there is a lot of resentment, but the options with Pakistan are limited because people in Pakistan don't see Afghans as their enemy.
And you mentioned briefly TTP activity. How is Pakistan approaching the question of the TTP along the frontier and the obvious pressures that come with it?
Well, I think alone this year there have been well over 300 soldiers of Pakistan military, and there were 200 others. More than 500 people have been killed in Pakistan by the TTP, and it is a becoming very difficult situation for Pakistan. They cannot put up with that kind of situation. They have to do something. Now, the general assessment in Pakistan is that Pakistan will go for some kind of a proportionate airstrikes inside Afghanistan. But since they are denying it, we can't say they have done it. But again, that is an option that if in any airstrike attacks, if the terrorists are not killed, if the civilians are killed, I think that is going to backfire because if in Pakistan, this is a religious country, and people have a affinity with their brothers in Afghanistan. They do want that these terrorists should be killed or they should be expelled from Afghanistan, but at the same time, they do not want the civilian casualties anywhere inside Afghanistan. So I think in that broader context, I think now the options with Pakistan are the diplomatic, which are more viable option, involving Russia, involving China, which have a lot of stakes in Afghanistan. And if there is a regional conference, which is already being planned, I think more diplomatic pressure can mend Taliban's ways. But at the same time, we have to also understand that ideologically speaking, these terrorist groups, TTP, which previously sided with the Afghan insurgents, and they fought against the NATO forces. Now, therefore, I think Afghan government, they feel obliged. They don't want to expel them. No, but at the same time, I think since there's a lot of frustration in Pakistan, my fear is that there is a possibility of a bigger kind of a conflict, not a war, if this situation persists. But at the same time, I have to also admit that not in every terrorist act in Pakistan is a planned inside Afghanistan. There are also other actors, there are also other factors who are responsible for terrorism in Pakistan. But certainly TTP terrorists being sheltered by Afghan government, they are one of the leading factor in surge of terrorism in Pakistan.
Other actors causing problems, also other actors coming to help solve the problem. Islamabad's hoping to see a delegation from Turkey arriving this week. What is the expectation from that delegation? How is it that Turkey, you think, can possibly help?
Well, I think the Turkey has gone, frankly speaking, out of the way to help Pakistan, to help Afghan government to come to a kind of come to the negotiating table and find some peaceful solution. And I think at one point of time, the talks had collapsed, and then the Turkey officials, they recalled Pakistani officials from the airport. That shows that the Turkey is very sincere with Pakistan and also with Afghanistan. But now the problem is that the Pakistan's demand to basically to Taliban government to provide guarantees that if there is a terrorism in Pakistan, then they will be held responsible. Afghan government is not willing to do that. And for the Turkey, now it's becoming difficult to find a mutual ground where both sides can be agreed upon. So again, this is a situation where Turkey feels that if both countries go for a war or for some kind of bigger conflict, so that is going to be a setback to the regional cooperation that Pakistan, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Iran, all these regional countries, they are trying to evolve over the period of time. So I think in a broader context, the options with the Turkey are very limited, because whenever the Turkish delegation visit Pakistan, Pakistan is going to come up with the hard evidence showing on how Afghan nationals are involved in terrorism in Pakistan, because lately Pakistan is also believing that most of the terrorists who have been carrying out attacks inside Pakistan, they are of Afghan national. I think that is a bigger problem, that on how a TTP terrorist organization, which were most of them were Pakistanis, now they are being joined by the Afghan national. So that is where Pakistan smells that perhaps that Afghan government has an ideological agenda to impose their harder version of Islam onto Pakistan. That is something which people in Pakistan are not going to accept.
Very interesting indeed. Thank you very, very much indeed, Javed. Always great to speak to you. Thank you very much. Okay, joining me now to discuss the Afghanistan perspective is regional analyst Devasha Pant, currently in London, UK. Devasha, very good to see you. I just want to start by asking you how Kabul is interpreting this loss of life in the host region and the allegation, frankly, that it's levelled at Pakistan.
Well, first, Kabul views this reported deaths in coast, including children, as a serious incident that demands a clarification through diplomatic channel. The Afghan officials have formally requested an explanation from Pakistan, stressing that any loss of civilian life must be fully investigated before conclusions are drawn. And while Pakistan stays quiet on carrying out a strike, an independent verification has not yet been established. So, Kabul's priority right now is preventing the kind of rapid escalation that has characterized past border tensions, including the extended closure at Torkham and Chaman in 2023 2024, and earlier clashes in 2022. So, from Afghanistan's perspective, the responsible path is to establish the facts transparently and ensure that this incident does not become another trigger for instability along historical sensitive frontier.
Now, whatever you may think of the Taliban government, it is still a group that is trying to rebuild a country, a job that brings with it enormous complexity and pressure. To what extent do you think those internal pressures are limiting, impinging on their ability to manage this crisis effectively?
Yes, well, the Taliban leadership is navigating significant internal as it shapes its responses. Communities in the wider southeast expects the authority to Afghan territory will be protected since the security remains central to the Taliban's claim to domestic legitimacy. At the same time, the policymakers are acutely aware that any renewed confrontation with Pakistan would carry real economic cost. So previous border shutdowns, how quickly trade can be disturbed, leading to shortages in already fragile market and prompting Afghan businesses to warn that they would need up to 3 months to shift their supply routes to Iran or Central Asia if a prolonged closure happened again. So, diplomatically, Kabul knows that it is under regional and international scrutiny, with neighbors closely watching whether its responses remain measured. All of these pressures stir the leadership towards a position that signals firmness at home but avoids steps that could trigger another period of cross-border instability.
And some of Pakistan's own positions, notably its perspective on the TTP presence along the border. What is Kabul's view of Pakistan's position on the presence of the TTP?
Well, so from Kabul's perspective, Pakistan's concerns about TTP are understood, but officials maintain that Afghanistan is not permitting militant group to use its territory as a staging ground. Afghan territory acknowledges that some armed elements do operate in the rugged frontier belt, but argue that effective border control requires cooperation rather than a unilateral accusation. Kabul emphasizes that previous opportunities for joint verification and intelligence sharing were not fully developed. Without coordinated mechanisms, the likelihood of misinterpretations remain high. So Afghanistan's stance is that Pakistan's concern should be addressed through a structural dialogue, evidence-based processes, and shared monitoring rather than a rhetoric that inflames tension.
Now, we spoke with Javed, our previous guest, about Islamabad's perspective on the forthcoming delegation from Turkey. What does Kabul expect from this mediation process?
Well, Afghanistan views Turkey as a stabilizing intermediary with long-standing ties to both Kabul and Islamabad. Kabul expects Ankara's presence in the talk to help maintain a focus on de-escalation, fact-finding and practical solutions rather than a political blame. And the Turkish mediation is seen as an opportunity to revive confidence-building measures that have stalled in previous bilateral engagement, including rapid communication channels, joint monitoring of sensitive areas, and agreed protocols for managing allegations of cross-border fire or militant movement. And Afghanistan believes that Turkey can help ensure the dialogue procedure concrete mechanisms on the ground, drawing on its history of facilitating regional diplomacy and its credibility with both parties.
Finally, Devash, do you think there's a danger that when you get these kind of allegations and they're neither absolutely refuted or absolutely confirmed, that in a sense that sort of leaves the way clear for them to possibly resurface again at a later stage when some evidence possibly is found, or when it's politically expedient to revisit it, and actually that can then cause destabilization further down the path?
Of course. If Kabul's claim regarding the coast incidents are later confirmed, Afghanistan is likely to push for more formalized rule governing cross-border security operations, greater protections for civilians, and clearer communications structures to prevent similar events. Confirmation would also heighten domestic expectations for the government to defend the Afghan sovereignty, potentially complicating the political space for cooperation. If the claims are not substantiated, Kabul will still view the episode as proof of the need for better verification mechanism, since past misunderstandings have repeatedly triggered border closures and skirmishes. So in both scenarios, the incident shows that the long-term stability of the relationship depends on predictable procedures, joint monitoring, and diplomatic discipline rather than a reactive measure.
Devash, we always appreciate your analysis. Thank you very much for joining us from London. Okay, in the next part of the programme, we turn to our correspondents around the world, bringing you on-the-go reporting, first-hand accounts from the stories shaping events tonight. EU and US trade ministers are meeting in Brussels for high-level talks on steel tariffs and digital regulations. Meanwhile, in Angola, the EU-African Union Summit is discussing partnership, investment, and Africa's growing role in global geopolitics. These events reflect the shifting dynamic of Europe's trade policy and strategic position worldwide. A News' Anita Sharma has more.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where trade ministers from the 27-nation EU met with their U.S. counterparts amid high-stakes talks over steel tariffs, digital regulation, and global supply chain tension. Meanwhile, in Angola, European and African leaders mark 25 years of partnership and signal a new phase. We begin in Brussels in a 90-minute lunch meeting between EU trade ministers, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer. The ministers were keen to press ahead on the July transatlantic trade deal and pushed for relief on punitive 50% tariffs related to EU steel and aluminum, and to eliminate levies from goods such as wine and spirits. But Lutnick delivered a stark message. Any relief on tariffs hinges on Brussels changing its digital industry rules. He said, quote, "Only then will we work together to handle the steel and aluminum issues." The Trump administration criticizes EU rules that limit the power of tech giants and requires online platforms to tackle harmful content. Lutnick asked the ministers to resolve the outstanding cases against Google, Microsoft, and Amazon and create a framework that, quote, "we are comfortable with." While a European Commission spokesperson reiterated that Europe has the sovereign right to legislate and that its digital legislation does not focus on where companies are based, the bloc is, for example, investigating Chinese companies such as Temu and Shein under the Digital Services Act. Overall, the meeting underscores the evolving dynamic that trade policy is increasingly about regulatory alignment, tech sovereignty, and geopolitical leverage. To that end, EU ministers also reviewed trade relations with India, underlining the urgency of finalizing a free trade agreement and responding to rising geopolitical tension with China, a country that has made tremendous inroads, quite literally, around the world, including in Africa. And that is where, in Luanda, Angola, Day 2 of the 7th African Union EU Summit gets underway, under the banner Promoting Peace and Prosperity Through Effective Multilateralism. Leaders from the EU and the African Union are discussing trade, investment infrastructure, migration, security, and the increasing importance of Africa's role in global geopolitics. Africa remains Europe's largest trade and investment partner, but the summit comes at a critical time. Africa is no longer a passive recipient, but an active player in value chains, critical minerals, and geopolitical dynamics. The leaders have committed to take EU-AU cooperation one step forward by boosting economic integration, investing in infrastructure and critical raw materials, while also embracing the digital revolution and accelerating climate finance. But experts warn the summit must deliver real outcomes, not just grand communiques. Today's gatherings in Brussels and Luanda reflect the changing face of Europe's external strategy. In trade talks with the U.S., the EU is under pressure to compromise, but also wants to defend its regulatory sovereignty. In Africa, Europe wants to reposition from donor to strategic partner, but can the bloc manage both diplomacy and delivery across the continents? For A News, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
A phone call between US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping was held in which the two leaders discussed trade and a potential visit for Trump to Beijing. Our correspondent in Beijing brings us more now.
US President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping held a high-level phone call indicating a significant development in US-China relations. According to the official readout, President Xi emphasized the centrality of Taiwan in China's vision of the post-war international order, while President Trump described the conversation as very good and stressed that the US-China relationship remains extremely strong. The two leaders also discussed trade issues, including soybeans and expanding economic cooperation, as well as security concerns in the region and global challenges such as fentanyl trafficking and the situation in Ukraine. During the call, President Trump accepted an invitation from President Xi Jinping to visit Beijing in April 2026, which would potentially be a massive milestone in bilateral diplomacy. The upcoming visit is expected to focus on strengthening trade ties, advancing cooperation on security issues, and fostering cultural and people-to-people exchanges. Manu Mathieu, A News, Beijing.
Iran's Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, Ali Larijani, is in Islamabad for a two-day official visit. His meetings will focus on bilateral ties along with regional and international developments. Our correspondent in Tehran brings us more now.
Iranian Secretary of Supreme National Security Council Ali Larijani arrived in Islamabad on Tuesday to meet Pakistani officials, discussing with them bilateral issues of interest as well as regional and global developments expected to include de-escalation of tension between Afghanistan and Pakistan and security along Iran and Pakistan's shared border. Iran's security chief told reporters upon arrival at Islamabad airport that reviewing the latest developments related to bilateral ties between Iran and Pakistan, follow up on joint agreements, regional and international developments, including major issues in the Islamic world, are on the agenda of his consultations with high-ranking officials in Pakistan. According to official IRNA news agency, Larijani met with Pakistan's Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mohammad Ishaq Dar on Tuesday and is scheduled to meet with Parliament Speaker, Prime Minister and President of Pakistan. In October, he told the visiting Pakistani Interior Minister in Tehran that relations with Islamabad have the potential to go beyond the level of current cooperation and develop to the level of a sustainable strategic partnership. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, A News.
Well, that brings us to the end of Prime Time. Please do join us tomorrow evening for more news and analysis. And from all of us here at A News, thanks for watching.